South Africa's city lights glow in the distance. But in the shadows, another kind of power surges, one not found in the grid. It is the power of fear, greed, and betrayal. Two names, Simnikiwe Mapini and Mafole, would become synonymous with a scandal that reached deep into the heart of municipal corruption. Both dead, both linked to the same dangerous truth. Billions looted from the system through fraudulent tenders, ghost billing, and electricity scams. And then there's Kagiso Lerutla, a man whose survival would make headlines, his attempted assassination pointing to a darker, more organized force, the so-called Ekurhuleni Cartel. What happened wasn't just a crime, it was a message. And in the underworld of South Africa's political and criminal elite, messages are written in blood. It starts with a number so staggering it feels like fiction. 2 billion. Enough money to rebuild broken power stations, replace failing transformers, and keep every home in Ekurhuleni lit through the night. Enough to change lives, enough to restore hope. But the money didn't go where it was meant to. Instead, a shadowy financial trail began to emerge, one littered with phantom contracts, ghost billing, and tenders so inflated they bordered on absurd. Public funds were vanishing into thin air, swallowed by a machine built for one purpose: to extract as much as possible before anyone could notice. Investigators uncovered payments to companies that existed only on paper, entities registered to tiny backrooms, abandoned buildings, and sometimes even shacks in forgotten townships. The directors of these companies, ordinary people who had no idea their identities had been stolen. A grandmother in Tembisa listed as the CEO of a multi-million rand energy supplier. A dead man's name on the registration of a construction firm. But there was more. Legitimate contractors, the ones who dared to play along, submitted invoices that were padded with costs for work never done. Entire projects were completed without a single spade touching the ground, and the signatures that approved these payments often belonged to officials who suddenly became unavailable, transferred, or in some cases, disappeared altogether. This wasn't sloppy corruption. This was precision-engineered theft, a criminal business model hidden inside the machinery of local government. Every fake invoice, every ghost tender, every shell company was a cog in a system that had been perfected over years. And those who got too close to the truth quickly discovered the unspoken rule of Ekurhuleni's underbelly. The deeper you dig, the shorter your life expectancy. Because here, 2 billion rand didn't just vanish. It bought silence. It bought loyalty. And in some cases, it bought death. Simnikiwe Mapini wasn't a politician. He wasn't a high-profile businessman. But in Ekurhuleni's murky underworld of municipal contracts, he was dangerous for one reason. He knew the truth. Colleagues say he had seen the numbers, the ghost invoices, the fake maintenance records, the mysteriously inflated payments for work that was never done. And unlike others, he wasn't content to stay quiet. But in a city where corruption buys silence, speaking up is a death sentence. On a cool evening, Mapini's life came to an abrupt and violent end. Witnesses recall the sound, not a wild spray of bullets, but controlled bursts. 2 shots, then another. No mistakes, no hesitation. He collapsed before he could even call for help. The hit was surgical. The getaway, flawless. The killers didn't linger, didn't panic, didn't need to. Within seconds, they were gone, swallowed by the city's night. Investigators would later conclude what everyone on the street already knew. This was no random robbery. This was a message. And that message was received loud and clear. If you know too much about the billions that vanished, you disappear too. Mapini's murder didn't just silence one man. It sent a ripple of fear through City Hall, through contractors, through anyone who had seen the books. Whispers in corridors turned to locked lips. Files that could have exposed the network quietly vanished. The truth was now buried, along with him. Then came Mafia, a name that until his death was barely known outside certain political and business circles. To those who understood the undercurrents of Ekurhuleni's power structure, Info was not just another name on a payroll. He was an insider, a quiet but well-informed operator with access to documents, deals, and conversations that could have shifted the balance of power overnight. His murder was not random. It was precise, deliberate, and unapologetically public. The hit happened in broad daylight, a cold message to anyone else thinking of speaking out. The method was brutal. Close-range shots, no warning, no chance for survival. Witnesses described the scene as surgical, like the work of professionals who had done this many times before. Investigators quickly realized they weren't dealing with desperate street thugs. This was an operation backed by intelligence, planning, and money. In the weeks before his death, Info had allegedly been in possession of files linking top officials to a complex network of fraudulent contracts, cash kickbacks, and phantom projects worth millions. Sources whispered that he was preparing to meet with an investigative journalist, a meeting that never happened. His killing sent shockwaves through the city, but strangely the ripples didn't spread towards justice. They spread towards fear. People who once spoke freely began avoiding reporters. Phones went unanswered. Files vanished. It was as if Mifo's death had triggered a silent lockdown of the truth. The pattern was now undeniable. Anyone with access to the truth was being eliminated. And in a twisted irony, the walls weren't closing in on the criminals. They were closing in on the very investigators tasked with bringing them down. Detectives were reassigned, cases stalled, and leads went cold overnight. For those watching closely, the message was clear. Power here wasn't just political, it was enforced at gunpoint. Kagiso Lerutla was not just another bureaucrat lost in the maze of government paperwork. As the group chief financial officer for the city of Ekurhuleni, he was a man who could follow the money. And in this scandal, the money trail was everything. His office controlled the lifeblood of the municipality, the tender processes, the flow of contracts, and the release of funds that could make or break fortunes overnight. If there was corruption, Kagiso would have seen it. If there were irregular transactions, he would have known who signed off and who benefited. That knowledge made him dangerous, not to the public, but to the shadowy figures pulling strings in the background. The day of the attacks started like any other, but in the world Kagiso was navigating, ordinary was a dangerous illusion. Surveillance footage later suggested he had been followed, methodically, patiently, for days, maybe weeks. His movements were predictable, his routine a trap waiting to be sprung. When the moment came, it was swift and merciless. A sedan pulled alongside his vehicle at an intersection. Windows rolled down and the muzzle flashes began. The air filled with the deafening crack of gunfire as bullets tore through metal and glass. Witnesses froze in shock, ducking behind cars as the scene erupted into chaos. By some combination of instinct, luck, and perhaps divine intervention, Kagiso survived. Wounded and shaken, he was rushed to hospital under armed guard. The gunman vanished into the city's sprawl, leaving behind more questions than answers. His survival changed the game. For the first time, someone marked for elimination had lived to tell the tale. But what he knew, and whether he would speak, became a closely guarded secret. Sources whispered that he had already compiled a file, a dossier of names, dates, and figures that could unravel the entire network. Others claimed his silence was part of a deal, a way to stay alive in a game where speaking out could be a death sentence. Either way, one thing was certain. Kagiso Lerutla had looked the Syndicate in the eye and lived, and in the murky underworld of political assassinations that made him both a survivor and the most dangerous man still breathing. They didn't wear matching suits or carry business cards, but in the corridors of Ekurhuleni's municipal power, their presence was unmistakable. Whispers swirled of a hidden syndicate, an invisible hand that reached deep into the city's finances and infrastructure. The media began calling the Ekurhuleni Cartel. This wasn't just a collection of shady operators, it was a carefully constructed ecosystem. Politicians with influence, municipal officials with access, contractors with the machinery, and criminal enforcers with the muscle. Together, they formed a closed circle where trust was traded like currency and betrayal was met with ruthless consequences. The cartel didn't operate in the open, yet its fingerprints were everywhere. From multi-million rand housing projects that never broke ground to overpriced road contracts that lined pockets more than they paved streets. Tenders didn't just happen. They were engineered, shaped long before they reached the public eye. And when someone threatened to expose the system, they disappeared, sometimes figuratively, sometimes literally. The Ekurhuleni Cartel wasn't bound by city borders. Its influence stretched into neighboring municipalities, feeding off state resources like a parasite. Its members were united not by loyalty, but by mutual benefit, and a chilling mutual silence. Breaking that silence could mean breaking your life. The official investigation was never straightforward. On paper, it was a standard anti-corruption probe, a few suspicious contracts, questionable bank transfers, and whispers of intimidation. But in reality, it was like trying to pull a single thread from a spider's web, knowing the whole thing could collapse on you at any moment. Weeks turned into months, and months into years. Files went missing. Witness statements were mysteriously retracted. Promising leads hit dead ends without explanation. The word in the corridors of power was that someone, or several someones, had no interest in letting the truth surface. Some insiders claimed the rot ran so deep that the very institutions tasked with investigating the cartel were quietly compromised. Others spoke of informants who vanished, of police officers suddenly transferred to desk duty in far-off provinces, and of forensic accountants who decided to take abrupt early retirements. And yet, in the shadows, a small, unshakable group pressed on. They weren't bound by the bureaucracy. Some were investigative journalists, others rogue detectives, and a few were insiders who had simply had enough. They pieced together timelines, matched names to numbered accounts, and mapped the flow of money like cartographers charting enemy territory. They could see the picture forming, a network of influence and fear stretching from Ekurhuleni's council chambers to private boardrooms, from dusty construction sites to luxury estates behind electric gates. And they knew every discovery, every new document, every reluctant testimony brought them one step closer to the truth and one step closer to the crosshairs. In this world, justice doesn't just take time, it takes courage. It was a gamble, and the stakes were life itself. The murders of Simnikiwe Mapini and Mafole, the near death of Kagiso Lerutla, the shadow of the Ekurhuleni Cartel. This is more than a story about money. It's about how power can be stolen, abused, and weaponized. It's about a war fought in boardrooms and back alleys, where contracts are worth more than lives. And as long as billions remain at stake, the killings will not stop. Somewhere out there, the masterminds still walk free, hidden in plain sight, shaking hands, signing deals, and waiting for the next threat to eliminate. Until someone decides that truth is worth dying for, this darkness will only grow deeper.